I remember the sting of salt against my lips, the sharp crack of laughter behind me, and the rush of air as my body tipped over the polished railing of the yacht. One shove. That's all it took. My daughter-in-law's hands were steady, almost practiced, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The last thing I saw before the ocean swallowed me whole was my son, my only son, standing there with a smile that cut deeper than the fall itself. It wasn't the water that choked me that day. It was the realization that the child I carried, the boy I nurtured, the man I trusted above all else, was now a stranger who found amusement in watching me drown. As I hit the surface, icy waves pulled me under, thrashing me like a rag doll. My body screamed for air, my arms fought for purchase, but my mind was locked on his face. That smirk, that cruel indifference, it branded itself into me like fire-searing flesh. I thought, so this is how it ends. Not with love, not with family, but with betrayal. And yet this was not the end. They believed the ocean had claimed me, that the tide had erased me, that their path to $3 billion was clear. But the ocean didn't bury me. It birthed me again. It gave me back to this world with a clarity I never had before. And when they walked back into their home, dressed in false grief, basking in sympathy and preparing to feast on what they thought was theirs, they had no idea that I was already waiting for them. Every betrayal has a sound. Some come in whispers. Some in slammed doors. Mine came in the laughter of my own blood. And I will never forget it. So, before I take you deeper into this story, I have to ask, if you believe no mother deserves to be betrayed by her own child, please hit that like button. And if you've ever felt alone in your pain, subscribe. That way, you're never alone again. You'll always have a community here. I was not born into wealth. My beginnings were modest, stitched together in a small town where neighbors shared sugar, doors were left unlocked, and dreams felt too big for the dusty streets we walked. My parents taught me that nothing in life was handed to you, that every dollar carried the weight of sweat, sacrifice, and long nights. I carried those lessons with me when I left home at 18 with little more than determination, and a notebook filled with ideas that everyone else thought were foolish. Life tested me early. I married young, believing in the promise of forever. My husband was kind, steady, the sort of man who made the hard days softer just by being near. But forever did not last. His heart gave out one unremarkable Tuesday morning, and suddenly I was both widow and mother, forced to raise my boy alone while figuring out how to survive. Michael was just a child then, his small hand gripping mine at the funeral, his eyes searching for answers I couldn't give. That was the day I swore to build something strong enough to carry us both. I started small late nights hunched over a kitchen table, calculating figures and making calls while Michael slept. I took risks others called reckless, invested where others hesitated, and slowly, brick by brick, built a business that grew into an empire. What began as one small logistics company expanded into shipping, real estate, and finally global investments. I built my fortune not on luck, but on years of missed birthdays, nights without sleep, and sacrifices so deep they carved lines into my face. By the time I turned 50, I was worth billions, but every step of the way I reminded myself why I was doing it: for Michael. Always for Michael. He was the center of my world, the reason I pushed through every barrier. I poured my love, my time, and my fortune into giving him the best education, the best opportunities, the best life I could craft. I thought I was raising a man who would not just inherit my wealth, but my values. For years, I believed I had succeeded. He was bright, charming, well-mannered, and I wore my pride like a second skin every time I saw him speak with confidence or saw others admire him. And then came Vanessa. She walked into Michael's life one summer during his graduate studies. I remember the first dinner we shared, her smile dazzling, her laugh musical, her words polished. She spoke of ambition, of supporting Michael, of building a future together. On the surface, she was everything a mother would want for her son. But even that night, something about her felt rehearsed, like each compliment was carefully placed, like each gesture was calculated. I told myself I was being protective, maybe even unfair. I wanted to believe in her because Michael believed in her. At first, I welcomed her. She slipped into our family gatherings with ease, eager to please, eager to charm. But little by little, I began to notice shifts. Conversations that used to flow between Michael and me began to falter. He became less open, his calls less frequent, his visits shorter. It was as though she had placed herself between us, and he let her. The boy who once clung to my words now seemed distracted, distant, dismissive. When money entered the conversation, the air grew heavier. Vanessa was always the one steering it, asking questions about my estate planning, suggesting investments that aligned with her family's interests, probing into matters that were once sacred between Michael and me. I would see the flicker in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, The way her gaze lingered on my possessions, my homes, my business shares. It wasn't curiosity, it was hunger. The tension grew sharper as months turned into years. When Michael and I sat together, his words carried traces of her opinions, her suggestions, her disapproval of how I ran my empire. He started echoing her concerns about how much stress I was under, how perhaps it was time I stepped back, handed over control, trusted them to manage things. There was a time when my son would never have spoken to me that way, but now his tone carried her fingerprints. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of a house I had built with my own 2 hands, wondering when my son had stopped being mine. Was it when I was too busy building wealth to notice the changes? Or was it when Vanessa entered his life with her painted smile and velvet words? I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the unease grew with every encounter. The breaking point came one Thanksgiving dinner. Vanessa sat at the head of the table beside Michael, speaking over me, directing the meal as if she were the matriarch. When I spoke, she interrupted. When I offered a story, she redirected the attention. Michael, instead of noticing, laughed along, oblivious or unwilling to see, and when dessert was served, Vanessa leaned across the table, her voice sugar-sweet but her eyes sharp, and said, "It's really time we discuss the future. You've worked hard enough. Don't you think Michael deserves to carry the torch now?" The room went silent. I smiled politely, but inside my heart cracked. It was no longer subtle. It was no longer imagined. She wasn't here for family. She was here for the fortune. And worse, Michael let her speak for him. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the empire I had built, I allowed myself to admit the truth. They didn't love me, not as a mother, not as a person. To them, I was a vault, a door they were waiting to pry open. And in that realization came a chill colder than any ocean water could ever be. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder if the family I had built was really family at all. It happened slowly at first, so gradually that if I had not been paying attention, I might have convinced myself I was imagining it. Vanessa began by taking small pieces of Michael's time. He would cancel lunches with me, claiming work had tied him up, but I knew better. He was with her. She would plan trips during the very weekends he had promised to visit. And when we did see each other, I noticed how his attention never lingered fully on me anymore. He was distracted, glancing at his phone, at her messages, his words carrying less of his own thoughts and more of hers. It felt as though he had become an echo, repeating lines she had written for him. Family dinners, once warm and filled with laughter, began to feel staged, like a play being performed for my benefit. Michael's words were rehearsed, his compliments wooden, his responses clipped. And Vanessa, she played her role too well. She would smile, ask me about my day in a voice dripping with politeness, but behind her eyes was a cold disinterest, the kind you cannot fake. When I looked at her, I no longer saw a daughter-in-law. I saw someone studying me like a chess piece she was planning to move. The home I had built for connection became a place of tension. Even my kitchen table, the very spot where I had balanced ledgers late into the night while Michael slept upstairs as a boy, now felt hostile. Vanessa sat there as if she owned it, crossing her legs and discussing my affairs with a confidence that unsettled me. She began to bring up matters no guest should ever raise, questions about my will, suggestions for simplifying my holdings, comments about how burdensome it must be for me to manage so much at my age. She made it sound casual, innocent, but the persistence of her interest betrayed her. Each conversation felt like another hand reaching for what I had built. The legal papers were the first undeniable sign. One evening after dinner, she slid a folder across the table toward me with a smile that did not touch her eyes. "Just something to think about," she said lightly. Inside were documents outlining estate planning, naming Michael as the primary heir, granting him full control of my companies and properties. She called it protection, insisted it was a way to ensure my legacy lived on without complication. But as I read through the fine print, it was clear. It was not about my legacy. It was about her security, her access, her power. I did not sign, of course. I closed the folder and told her I would consider it. But inside I was boiling. It was not the request itself that shattered me. It was the fact that Michael sat silently beside her, nodding in agreement, watching me with a quiet expectancy, as though he too believed I should hand over everything I had spent my life creating. That was the night I realized he no longer stood beside me. He stood beside her. Still, the most cutting wound came not from papers or signatures, but from words I was never meant to hear. One evening, as I walked down the hall toward the guest room, I heard Vanessa's voice echoing through the cracked door. She was laughing, her tone sharp, mocking. "She's not going to last much longer. You can see it. She's slowing down. We just need to be patient." She'll be gone before she knows it, and everything will be ours. I froze. The laughter pierced me deeper than the words themselves, but what shattered me completely was Michael's response. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell her she was cruel. He laughed too. My son. My child. Laughing at the prospect of my death as though it were a convenience. A business arrangement finally falling into place. I returned to my room that night, but I couldn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed with my hands trembling, replaying the sound of their laughter over and over until it felt like it was crushing me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and for the first time, I did not see a mother. I saw a target. Disposable. Replaceable. An obstacle between them and the life they wanted. The pain was unlike anything I had ever known. Grief when I lost my husband had nearly broken me, but this was different. This was betrayal that crawled under the skin. Betrayal that whispered you had given everything. And in return, you had raised someone who would rather see you gone. I found myself whispering into the silence. I raised a son who now sees me as disposable. But if Vanessa thought my age had dulled me, if Michael thought his mother had grown too weak to fight back, they underestimated the very woman who built an empire from nothing. Betrayal may have wounded me, but it also awakened something fierce inside me. That night, as the house grew still and their laughter faded into sleep, I made a decision. They would not take what I had built. They would not write me out of my own life. They would not win. I rose the next morning with a plan forming quietly in my mind. I reached out to my most trusted confidant, my lawyer, a man who had stood by me through decades of contracts, deals, and battles. We met in secret behind closed doors, far from Michael and Vanessa's reach. And together we began to weave a counterplan. Every document they placed before me, I mirrored with my own in silence. Every suggestion they made I took note of and turned against them. I began restructuring my estate in ways they could not imagine, tightening the walls around my fortune, ensuring that if anything happened to me, their hands would come up empty. They thought they were clever, whispering in corners, laughing behind doors, planning my end. But they had forgotten who I was. I was the woman who had taken grief and turned it into empire. I was the woman who had built a life from ashes, and if they believed I would be so easily erased, they were about to learn the most painful lesson of their lives. For in their betrayal, they had awakened a side of me that would not simply protect what was mine. It would destroy everything they thought was theirs. And so, while they plotted, I prepared. And they never saw it coming. It was early spring when Vanessa suggested the yacht trip. She made it sound harmless, wrapped her invitation in words that carried the illusion of warmth and family unity. "We've all been under so much stress," she said one evening, her voice smooth as silk while she rested her hand on Michael's arm. "It would be good for us to get away for a while. No business, no distractions. Just family, out on the water, reconnecting." On the surface, it was the kind of suggestion I had longed for. A chance to sit with my son without boardrooms, contracts, or the ever-present shadow of wealth looming over us. Yet the way she said it lingered in my chest, heavy and unsettling. There was something in her tone, a forced brightness that didn't quite match her eyes. Still, Michael seemed thrilled at the idea, nodding in agreement, pressing the importance of spending time together. He spoke of it as though it were his idea too, but his words carried the same rehearsed cadence I had come to recognize. My instincts pricked at me like thorns, urging me to refuse, to tell them no, to claim illness or work or any excuse that might keep me safely on land. But then I thought of Michael, my son, the boy I had raised through storms of my own. How many times had I sacrificed my comfort for his? How many times had I chosen his happiness over my peace? If he wanted me there, if even a fragment of the boy I raised still lingered inside the man sitting across from me, I could not say no. I agreed, masking my unease behind a smile, telling myself I was doing it for family, for him. The night before the trip, I found myself unable to sleep. I walked through the silent halls of my home, touching the framed photographs on the walls. Michael as a child holding his first trophy, Michael on his graduation day, Michael with his father before fate took him from us. Each image stirred a different ache, a reminder of why I had given everything of myself. I thought of my husband, his steady voice still echoing in my memory. "Trust your instincts. They'll never betray you. Even when people do." Those words weighed on me like a warning. My instincts screamed that something was off. Vanessa's sudden eagerness, Michael's unusual enthusiasm, the way they had been pressing me about the future in recent weeks, it all collided in my mind like puzzle pieces forming an image I didn't want to see. And yet, I silenced those instincts, convincing myself I was paranoid, that grief and betrayal had made me suspicious of everything. I whispered to the night that I would endure this trip, keep the peace, and perhaps find a way to bring Michael back to me. When morning came, the sky was bright and deceptively calm. The yacht was pristine, gleaming under the sunlight, its deck polished to perfection. Crew members smiled and welcomed us aboard, though their glances were brief, hurried, as if they had been instructed to keep their eyes down. Michael moved confidently, his arm draped around Vanessa, while I followed behind, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with my luggage. From the moment we stepped aboard, I felt eyes on me. Not from the crew but from Michael and Vanessa. It was subtle, fleeting, quick glances exchanged between them, followed by hushed whispers and faint smiles. I caught it more than once, the way Vanessa leaned in close to him, speaking words too soft for me to hear, his lips twitching upward as though she had reminded him of some private joke. They believed themselves discreet, but I had built a life on observing people, on reading the smallest signs of intention. And what I saw in their looks was not love. It was conspiracy. The yacht pulled away from the harbor, cutting through the waves with a power that vibrated through the deck. Vanessa poured champagne, her voice too cheerful, her laughter too loud. She insisted we toast to family, to new beginnings. Michael echoed her words, raising his glass with forced enthusiasm, but when our eyes met, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. I recognized that hesitation, that flicker of discomfort he tried to hide. It wasn't the look of a man at peace. It was the look of a man who knew something he didn't want to admit. I sipped my champagne, but it tasted bitter, my throat tightening with every swallow. I wanted to ask him outright what was happening, why they kept looking at each other as though I were not in the room. But I stayed silent. Instead, I studied them as one studies predators in the wild, never making sudden movements, never revealing fear. Hours passed with conversation that felt shallow and forced. Vanessa spoke of the future, painting pictures of vacations abroad, of properties to be managed, of legacies to be carried forward. Michael chimed in where she led, his words mirroring hers, his voice too careful, too scripted. Not once did he speak with the warmth I remembered from years past. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, I felt the shift. Their energy changed. Vanessa's voice lowered, her laughter stopped. Michael grew quieter, his eyes darting toward the crew before landing back on me. The glances between them grew more frequent, more urgent. I could feel it in the air, heavy and pressing, as if the yacht itself held its breath. And in that moment I knew. This was not a family trip. It was not about bonding or love or even appearances. It was something else entirely. It wasn't a vacation. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a gathering of family. It was an execution. The night had grown quiet, the ocean carrying only the sound of its waves slapping against the sides of the yacht. I remember the cool air brushing against my face, the scent of salt stinging my nose, and the stars above scattered like diamonds across a black canvas. For a brief moment I closed my eyes, thinking perhaps I was being paranoid. Perhaps the glances, the whispers, the strange tension had been nothing more than my grieving mind playing tricks on me. But when I opened my eyes, Vanessa was standing just inches away. Her smile was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Michael stood behind her, his expression unreadable, his fists clenched at his sides. She leaned closer, her perfume thick and suffocating, and whispered words I will never forget. Say hi to the sharks. And before I could even process, before I could react, her hands pressed firmly against my chest, and I felt myself flying backward. The deck vanished beneath my feet, the sky spun above me, and then came the brutal slap of the ocean swallowing me whole. The cold was immediate, violent, like knives piercing every inch of my skin. My body convulsed as the salty water invaded my mouth, burning my throat. I surfaced for a desperate breath, gasping, my eyes stinging from salt and betrayal. Above me I heard it, the sound of laughter. Shrill, cruel, merciless laughter. Vanessa's voice cut through the night like a blade, and faintly I thought I heard Michael too. Not loud, not joyous, but a low, broken chuckle that told me his silence was consent. Betrayal, I realized in that instant, cuts deeper than drowning. The ocean wanted to take me, but the pain in my chest was not from water. It was from the boy I had raised, the boy who now stood watching me sink. The yacht's lights grew smaller as it moved farther away, their silhouettes leaning against the railing as though watching a performance. My arms flailed, my legs kicked, but the waves were merciless. Every time I surfaced for air, a new swell crashed over me, dragging me deeper. My lungs screamed, my muscles burned, and the weight of despair threatened to pull me under. I told myself this couldn't be my end. Not here, not like this, not at their hands. Clawing against the pull of the ocean, I searched the dark water desperately until my fingers grazed something solid. A splintered piece of wood, wreckage that must have broken loose from the yacht. I clung to it, my nails digging into the sodden grain, my body trembling with exhaustion and cold. Hours blurred into a cruel eternity. The night was endless, and every wave seemed determined to rip me from the fragile lifeline I held. My mind wandered in and out of clarity. Visions of my husband's face, my son's first cry, the years of sacrifice and love that now seemed meaningless. Each memory fueled me, forcing me to cling tighter, to push back against the sea's attempt to claim me. Just as I began to lose strength, just as my fingers threatened to slip free, I saw a faint light in the distance. A small boat, bobbing gently against the vastness of the ocean. My heart thudded with a final surge of hope, and I mustered what little voice I had left. Help! The cry was weak, broken, carried off by the wind, but it was enough. The boat drew closer, and through blurred vision, I saw the outline of a fisherman. His face came into focus as he pulled me from the water, his arms strong, his voice shouting in alarm. He laid me across the wooden boards of his vessel, wrapping me in an old, rough blanket as I coughed violently, choking up seawater. His eyes lingered on my face with recognition, widening as though he couldn't believe who he had rescued. You're... he began, but I cut him off with a weak shake of my head. Don't... I whispered, my voice hoarse, trembling. Don't tell anyone. Not yet. He hesitated, confusion etched across his weathered face, but something in my eyes must have told him I was serious. He nodded slowly, keeping my secret as sacred as a prayer. As his boat carried me toward the shore, I stared out at the horizon, where the yacht had long since disappeared into the night. My body was broken, my heart torn apart, but my mind was sharper than ever. I realized in that moment the cruel gift they had given me, freedom. They believed I was gone, swallowed by the sea, erased from existence. And in their ignorance they had given me the one thing I needed most. Time. I let them think I was dead. It gave me time to prepare. If this part of my story broke your heart, don't just scroll away. Show me you're listening, like this video. And if you believe justice should always find its way, share this story. Someone out there might need to hear it today. The next morning, the newspapers carried my name like a headline carved in stone. Prominent businesswoman presumed lost at sea. The broadcasters read my story with voices dripping with practiced sympathy. Photos of me, smiling at galas, shaking hands at charity events, standing beside my late husband, flashed across screens. They called me a pillar of the community, a woman of strength and generosity. They painted my life as a tale cut short by tragedy. The nation mourned me, but none mourned louder, or more publicly, than my own son and his wife. Michael's face appeared on every network, his eyes glassy, his voice breaking at carefully chosen intervals. Vanessa clung to his arm, dabbing her cheeks with tissues, the perfect image of a devastated daughter-in-law. Together, they played their roles flawlessly. They stood before microphones, asking for privacy in their grief, thanking the Coast Guard for their search efforts, pretending to be broken by loss. But I knew better. I had heard her laughter as the water pulled me down. I had seen his silence, his complicity. Behind closed doors, their masks fell away. I knew because I had someone watching. Mr. Harrison, my husband's old lawyer and my most trusted confidant, had been the first person I reached out to in secret. He had known me since my youth, had handled every contract, every trust, every estate detail. When the fisherman delivered me to the shore that night, shaking and half-drowned, I sent word only to him. He came to me without hesitation, his eyes widening when he saw I was alive, his voice steady as he promised, "We'll turn this into their undoing." Through him, I learned how quickly Michael and Vanessa shed their grief once the cameras turned away. At home, they toasted with champagne, whispering of freedom, of money, of power. Vanessa wasted no time. She sat at my desk, leafing through financial papers, demanding updates on assets, sighing dramatically at the burden of managing such a vast estate. Michael followed her lead, timidly at first, then with growing boldness, talking of investments, of liquidating properties, of selling pieces of my life like they were trinkets at a yard sale. It sickened me to watch the clips on television, my own son rehearsing grief for the world while privately counting the dollars my death had gifted him. They thought my billions were theirs now, that the empire my husband and I had built with blood and sweat would pass easily into their hands. But the truth, which only Mr. Harrison and I shared, was that the papers Vanessa had once tried to push me into signing, the so-called estate planning documents, had been nothing more than a trap. I had never signed them. My estate remained firmly under my control, though they didn't know it yet. Every day, I sat in the quiet of the small seaside house where Mr. Harrison hid me, watching the coverage, my disgust simmering into determination. The world believed I was gone. Even extended family called Michael with condolences, their voices heavy with pity for a son who had lost his mother. None of them suspected the darkness beneath his silence, the hunger in his wife's eyes. I listened, I watched, and slowly I began to plan. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure their betrayal never went unpunished. My silence became my greatest weapon. Every moment they spent celebrating my absence, every laugh, every plan to dismantle the legacy I had built, was another nail in the coffin they had unknowingly built for themselves. Mr. Harrison sat with me late into the night, the two of us poring over documents, creating a counterplan so intricate, so precise, that by the time Michael and Vanessa realized I was alive, it would already be too late. He reminded me of my late husband's words, that strength isn't loud, it is silent, waiting, patient, like the tide that eventually swallows the shore. I let the world grieve me. I let my son and his wife believe they had won. But in the stillness of my supposed disappearance, I was sharpening the edges of my revenge. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't buried me in the ocean. They had only awakened the part of me they should have feared the most. When the days of hiding turned into weeks, I realized survival alone was not enough. To defeat an enemy, you must first know them entirely. Vanessa had painted herself to the world as polished, sophisticated, and loyal, but I knew masks like hers rarely hold when you look close enough. I asked Mr. Harrison to dig, not just into her, but into everything about her past that she had buried beneath her charm. The results stunned me. Vanessa's life was a string of shadows. Before she married my son, she had been tethered to men whose names carried the stink of scandal. A hedge fund manager who lost millions of other people's money and mysteriously disappeared. A contractor accused of bribery and fraud. Vanessa's name never appeared in the headlines, but her fingerprints were always there. Bank accounts that bloomed with money and drained before the dust settled. Properties bought and sold overnight. Debts that never seemed to touch her directly but ruined those around her. She was clever, I'll give her that. She left just enough distance between herself and every crime to stay innocent. But she had been a parasite for years, feeding on the weak, the arrogant, the blinded. And then she found my son, Michael, my boy, who was too hungry for approval and too eager to be loved. He wasn't her first victim. He was her prize. At first, the rage in me was fire. How could she have lured him so easily? But then, as I read more, as I pieced together her dealings, the fire turned to ice. Because buried inside the records, emails, bank statements, even photographs, was something that cut deeper than I ever expected. Michael had known. He knew about her affairs, her cons, her games with money. He saw it, perhaps not all, but enough to question the kind of woman he had married. And yet he stayed. Not because of love, but because she fed the parts of him that craved wealth, status, and power. That was when the real heartbreak set in. It wasn't Vanessa who shocked me, it was him. My own son. The boy I had cradled in my arms. The child who once followed me around the kitchen asking if I was proud of him. The young man who stood by his father's grave and swore to me that he would always protect me. That same boy had turned a blind eye to the poison seeping into his life, because greed whispered louder than conscience. The weight of that realization crushed me in ways drowning never had. In the quiet of that seaside home I broke. I asked myself questions no mother should have to ask. Where did I go wrong? Did I love him too much? Did I shield him from consequences so completely that he grew blind to morality? Or was betrayal something born in him, something I could never have changed? The shame of even thinking that sent me spiraling into memories. Memories of laughter at the dinner table, of him clutching my hand as a child, of the way his father once looked at him with pride. But then as grief pulled at me like undertow, another memory surfaced. My husband's voice. Strong, calm, deliberate. Strength isn't in forgiving betrayal. It's in confronting it. Facing it head-on without flinching. He had told me those words once when we were rebuilding after a business partner stole from us. Back then, I hadn't understood how deeply those words would one day carve themselves into my soul. I realized then that this was not just about Michael or Vanessa, or even the billions they wanted to steal. This was about something bigger. About truth, about legacy, about not letting betrayal go unchecked. If I forgave this, if I let them get away with it, I would be teaching the world and myself that betrayal is stronger than love, greed stronger than loyalty. And I couldn't accept that. So, piece by piece, I began to lay the foundation for silent revenge. Harrison and I gathered every document, every hidden affair, every offshore account Vanessa thought no one would ever trace. We traced her affairs, men who still had grudges, men who would talk if approached the right way. We compiled photographs of her luxury purchases, things she couldn't explain on her official income. Slowly, a tapestry of deceit emerged, one that no public mask could cover once revealed. But it wasn't just Vanessa I was preparing for. It was Michael. My son would not be spared. He needed to face the truth of his choices, even if it shattered him. Especially if it shattered him. Because betrayal doesn't heal with silence, it festers. And if I didn't confront it, he would carry it deeper into his life, into everything he touched, infecting generations to come. My heart broke, but my resolve hardened. I wasn't just a grieving mother. I wasn't a drowned woman pulled from the sea. I was a survivor, armed with the truth, and I would wield it like a blade. If this part of my story has reached you, if it made your chest heavy, if it made you think of someone who once turned against you, then I ask you not to walk away. Stories like these are hard to tell, but I share them because someone out there is going through betrayal right now. Don't just watch, subscribe so you never miss these lessons life has written in pain. And please comment below. Have you ever trusted someone who turned on you? Because betrayal thrives in silence. And I refuse to stay silent any longer. When the news of my death spread far enough, it was only a matter of time before Michael and Vanessa made their move. I knew them well enough to predict their steps. They wouldn't wait to grieve, wouldn't pause to reflect. They would run straight to the lawyers like wolves chasing blood. And so they did. The day of the estate hearing arrived, and though I wasn't there in body, I was present in spirit. Harrison made sure of that. He had been my confidant for years, privy to secrets even Michael never knew. My husband and I had drafted a will years ago, and after his death, I had rewritten it with Harrison's guidance. Quietly, cautiously, carefully, because I knew the world, and I knew greed. And though I had never suspected it would come from my own flesh and blood, I had prepared for betrayal long before it reached me. Michael and Vanessa walked into that marble-walled office dressed in black. To the cameras outside, they looked like grieving heirs, heavy with sorrow. But Harrison later told me their eyes betrayed them, sharp, hungry, almost feverish with the thought of billions falling into their hands. The lawyers laid out the documents. Michael's hands twitched as he signed the initial acknowledgments, Vanessa's painted smile never faltering. She was the picture of a dutiful widow, clinging to her husband's mother's legacy. And then the moment they had been waiting for, the reading of the will. First it seemed straightforward. The estate was valued, the accounts tallied, the properties listed. Michael sat taller. Vanessa's nails tapped against the mahogany table in anticipation. But then Harrison, with that calm, steady voice of his, read the clause they never expected. The bulk of my fortune, my empire, my life's work, was locked away in a charitable trust. It would not go to Michael. It would not go to Vanessa. Not immediately, not without conditions. The money, the assets, the shares, all were bound to a set of moral requirements. My heirs would have to prove themselves in acts of responsibility, transparency, and service to others. They could not sell off the businesses for profit, could not drain accounts for personal use. For every dollar spent, there had to be accountability. For every property touched, there had to be purpose. And only after years of such stewardship, documented and overseen, would the fortune gradually transfer into their hands. The silence in that room was deafening. Michael's face paled, and Vanessa's lips curled as though she had bitten into poison. She tried to mask her fury with a polite nod, but her knuckles turned white where her hands clenched together. Harrison told me later, he had never seen two people struggle so hard to keep their masks in place. In public, they had no choice. To the cameras waiting outside, they smiled and wept, talking of honoring my memory, of carrying on my legacy. They spoke of charity, of good works, of how much she meant to us. Their performance was flawless. The world believed them. Headlines declared them the perfect heirs, dutiful, grieving, noble. But behind closed doors, their rage was volcanic. I could picture it as clearly as if I were standing in the room. Michael, pacing like a caged animal, shouting about how he was owed more, how I had no right to tie his inheritance to conditions. Vanessa, cold and venomous, whispering strategies, reminding him that appearances must be maintained, but seething that her golden life had been snatched from her grasp. They hadn't just wanted my wealth, they had wanted it fast, unbound, untethered. And now it was slipping through their fingers like sand. And where was I during all of this? Safe. Hidden. Alive. I had moved into a quiet house on the edge of the city, one only Harrison and I knew of. To the world, I was lost to the sea. But in reality, I was closer than they could imagine. From that place, I could watch them. I could track their every word, every move, every fake smile. I could see the empire I had built, now guarded by rules they despised, rules that would strangle their greed. It wasn't just about money anymore. This was the first layer of my revenge, the unveiling of the will they never expected. A reminder that I had not raised a fool, that even in death, I had the power to control their world. They thought they had won by pushing me into the sea, but all they had done was awaken the storm I had prepared years ago. And as I sat in that safe place, the plan for my grand reveal began to take shape. because taking back control was never enough. No, I would make them face me. Not as the mother they betrayed, but as the woman they tried to bury and failed. The weeks that followed were a theater of lies, and I sat in the shadows watching every scene unfold. Michael and Vanessa paraded themselves in black attire at press galas, charity dinners, and staged interviews. They wept on cue, their grief a performance polished enough to fool an unsuspecting world. But I saw through it. Their hands shook not with sorrow but with greed. Their eyes glimmered not with tears of love, but with the hunger of entitlement. They basked in the attention, playing heirs to a fortune they believed was already theirs, while privately, they cursed the chains of my will. I watched as Vanessa draped herself in expensive gowns, smiling for cameras, though she knew every dress was bought with borrowed favors and credit stretched to the breaking point. I watched as Michael raised toasts at lavish dinners, pretending to honor my memory while gnawing at his own rage inside, furious that he could not access what he believed belonged to him. They spent money they did not yet have, they built castles on sand, and every day they sank deeper into the pit of their own arrogance. I let them play their little game. I let them believe they were untouchable, because every story has its climax, and mine was drawing near. That night, the air was different. The city was alive with lights and music as another press gala filled the grand halls of the Belmont Hotel. Cameras flashed, microphones caught every word as Vanessa and Michael stepped onto the red carpet. She leaned into him, whispering sweet nothings, her smile as sharp as glass. He kept his chin high, the perfect picture of a grieving son turned resilient leader. The world adored them. But I had already written the final act of their performance. Hours later, the limousine pulled up to their mansion. They were drunk on applause, basking in the artificial glow of sympathy and attention. Vanessa kicked off her heels as they stumbled inside, laughter echoing through the marble foyer. Michael loosened his tie, muttering curses about the reporters, already plotting how to twist the next headline in their favor. They thought they were coming home to the safety of their kingdom. But kingdoms built on betrayal crumble in silence. Because I was already there. I sat in their living room, waiting. The fire burned low, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The clock ticked steadily, a drumbeat marking the moment their world would change forever. When they stepped into that room, their laughter died instantly. Vanessa froze mid-step, her purse slipping from her shoulder, crashing to the floor. Michael blinked, as though his mind couldn't accept what his eyes were telling him. I didn't move. I sat calmly in the armchair, my posture steady, my gaze fixed on them. To them, I must have looked like a ghost, pale, alive, yet impossible. Their breaths caught, and in the silence, I could hear the thundering of their hearts. "Hello, Michael," I said softly, my voice carrying through the room like a whisper from the grave. "Vanessa." Michael staggered back, his face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Vanessa's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide, trembling like a woman staring at the impossible. She stammered, "Why, you're supposed to be dead." I finished for her, my tone calm, almost gentle. "Yes. That's what you wanted, isn't it? That's what you celebrated when you thought no one was watching." The room thickened with silence. Their eyes darted to each other, desperate for some explanation, some escape, but there was none. I leaned forward, folding my hands in my lap. "Do you know what it feels like?" I asked quietly. "To be pushed into the sea by the very people you gave life to? To feel the weight of betrayal sink deeper than the waves ever could? To know your son stood by as the woman he chose called you nothing more than a stepping stone to fortune?" Michael's lips quivered. A child again before his mother's judgment. Vanessa's mask cracked, fear etched across her face like lines carved in stone. "You both thought you buried me," I continued, my voice steady, deliberate. "But what you buried was your chance at redemption. You thought I was gone, but here I am alive. Watching. Waiting. And now I've come home." The flames in the fireplace snapped, sending shadows leaping against the walls. My presence wasn't loud. I didn't scream, I didn't rage. I didn't need to. My calmness was the sharpest blade, cutting deeper than any fury could. To them, I was no longer just their mother, no longer just a woman betrayed. I was the ghost of every lie they had told, every secret they had buried, every plan they thought would never be uncovered. They stood frozen, their breaths shallow, as though even the air around me was too heavy for them to bear. I let the silence drag, savoring the weight of it pressing down on them. Then with a faint smile I whispered, "You played your parts well, but the performance is over. This is my homecoming." If this moment gave you chills, imagine how many people out there need to feel this kind of strength. Don't keep it to yourself. Share this video. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you stand with strong women who refuse to stay silent. They wanted me gone. erased from the world like an inconvenient page torn from a book. But instead I lived, and in my survival I found clarity sharper than any blade. That night, as I sat across from Michael and Vanessa in the flickering glow of their fire, I told them the truth they had never expected to hear from my lips. I didn't drown, I said calmly, my gaze never wavering from theirs. The ocean has always been a friend of mine, not an enemy. You pushed me into it, believing its waves would swallow me whole. But the sea does not consume those who respect it. I held on to the current, and with the help of a fisherman who saw what you did, I reached the shore. Michael's mouth twitched, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. You're lying, he whispered hoarsely, though even he didn't believe his own words. I tilted my head slightly. If I were lying, you would not see me sitting here. You would not hear my voice. You would not feel your heart hammering against your ribs in fear. No, Michael, the lie was yours. And now you are trapped in it. Vanessa clutched his arm, but I saw it in her eyes, the recognition of defeat, the shattering of her illusions. She had built her empire on deception, but every lie was crumbling before her, brick by brick. I leaned back, letting the silence hang before I continued. When I left that ocean, I didn't run. I watched. I listened. I pieced together the betrayal in every corner of my life. I saw how you both paraded yourselves in public, dressing in black and speaking of grief, while behind closed doors you laughed at my absence. I saw the reporters you courted, the interviews you arranged, the charities you exploited in my name. You thought my estate would be yours, a treasure chest waiting to be plundered. But you miscalculated. You underestimated me. I told them what they never saw coming. Every penny of my fortune, every acre of my land, every business I built with my own hands, none of it belongs to you. The estate has already been transferred into trusts, charities, and programs that cannot be touched. The loyal employees you dismissed with arrogance now stand to inherit stability. The community you ignored now holds the legacy you tried to steal. You, Michael, have nothing. Not the mansion you stand in, not the company you tried to control, not the respect you thought you commanded. You are penniless. Stripped. A man with no power, no honor, and no claim. Michael's face twisted. A cocktail of rage and humiliation, but he didn't speak. His silence was more telling than any word he could muster. Then my eyes turned to Vanessa. Her breath caught in her throat as though she already knew what was coming. And you? I said slowly, my tone cutting through the room like steel. Did you think your secrets would stay buried? Did you think your affairs would never surface? That the fraud you committed in the shadows would remain hidden? The world will see you for what you are, Vanessa. Not the grieving daughter-in-law, not the woman draped in black and pearls, but the schemer who clawed her way into this family with lies. The media already whispers your name, and soon the whispers will become screams. Your face will not grace magazine covers. It will stain headlines as scandal and disgrace. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the sofa, her hands trembling. Michael stared at her, realization dawning in his eyes that she was not only his partner in crime, but his undoing. I didn't stop there. I told them what loomed just beyond their vision. There is a police investigation quietly unfolding as we speak. The money you stole, the fraud you committed, the witnesses you thought were blind, they are all being gathered like threads in a net. You won't see it until it's too late. But know this, justice does not always come with sirens. Sometimes it walks quietly, patiently, until it is ready to strike. And when it does, neither of you will escape. The silence after my words was suffocating. The fire crackled, but even its warmth could not melt the ice that filled the room. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, trembling with impotent fury. Vanessa's mascara streaked her cheeks, her perfect image unraveling before my eyes. They were broken, not by shouting, not by violence, but by the weight of a truth too heavy for them to bear. And I did not raise my voice. I did not rage. I did not scream, because my silence was heavier than any punishment. My presence alone was enough to crush them beneath the gravity of their own actions. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my coat, and walked to the door. Their eyes followed me, desperate, terrified, pleading for something they could not name. But I gave them nothing. No comfort, no forgiveness, no second chance. At the threshold, I paused, my back still to them. You wanted me gone, I said softly. Consider your wish fulfilled. You have lost me, and in losing me, you have lost everything. I opened the door and the cool night air rushed in. Without another word, I stepped into the darkness, leaving them with the ruins of their own ambition. Behind me, the house that once felt like mine was no longer a home, but a tomb of their choices. I didn't need to watch them collapse into their misery. I didn't need to hear their cries. My silence had already spoken louder than any scream. My revenge was not in fire or fury. It was in walking away, knowing their empire was ashes, their names tainted, and their hearts forever haunted by the ghost of the woman they tried to erase. And so I vanished into the night, not broken, not defeated, but whole. Because true revenge is not destruction, it is survival. And I survived. It wasn't the ocean that almost killed me, it was love misplaced. For years I poured my soul into a son who believed that blood was enough to excuse his betrayal. I gave Michael everything, my time, my wisdom, my sacrifices, my wealth. And yet, when the test came, when loyalty was measured not in comfort but in truth, he chose greed over love, vanity over family, and ambition over the very woman who gave him life. But I no longer ask myself why. Betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It is almost always wrapped in the faces we trust most. That is why it cuts so deep, because the knife is handed to them by our own faith. I have walked through fire, through loss, through humiliation, and through a plan meant to erase me. And yet, I stand here whole. Not because I am stronger than betrayal, but because I refused to let betrayal define me. For a long time I blamed myself. I asked, did I fail as a mother? Was it my blindness that allowed Michael's hunger for wealth to consume him? But no. I see now. I gave him love, and what he did with it was his choice, not my failure. My only mistake was believing that my love could shield him from the rot of his own character. So I forgive myself. I forgive the woman who once wept over his betrayal, who lay awake at night replaying every sign she ignored. I forgive the mother who thought she could love her son into goodness. I forgive the version of me who didn't yet understand that some hearts cannot be saved, no matter how much you pour into them. And to you, listening to my story, carrying your own scars, let me tell you this. Strength is not in never being broken. Strength is in rising after the world has tried to bury you alive. Strength is in choosing silence when screaming would be easier. Strength is in walking away when staying would destroy you. Do not let betrayal shape you into bitterness. Do not let it steal your kindness, your gentleness, or your belief in yourself. Betrayal is not the end of your story. It is only a chapter, and what you write after it is entirely in your hands. I have found peace, not in revenge, but in life. My silence was my sword, my survival the victory they could never take. And my greatest revenge is this. I live. I breathe. I thrive. And they are left with nothing but the sight of my survival. A reminder that their plan failed, that their cruelty could not erase me. So remember this. True revenge is not fire and fury. True revenge is walking forward with dignity, with calm, with the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be broken. True revenge is to live, and to make them watch. And if you stayed with me until now, you're part of my story too. Don't leave without pressing like. Subscribe to this channel so you never walk through heartbreak alone. And share this video. You never know whose life it might change.